So let's now work on the HTML, the JSX code of an event item. Now here you should follow along closely because I will also provide finished styles to you in a second, and those styles will only do their job correctly if you have the same HTML code. So therefore make sure you follow along closely. Of course, you can also always use the code snapshots you find attached to the last lecture of every module to compare your code to mine in case you have some deviation somewhere. And therefore, let's get started. I want to have an image here, an image element in every list item where we display the image of a chosen event or of a rendered event here. So we'll need to set up a source here and some alt text, and we'll work on the data in a second. For the moment, let's just create the HTML code. And then below that, I want to have a div below that image. In there, I want to have two more divs. And in the first div in here, I start with a title, an h2 element here, where we output the title of that event. Then below that, another div where I want to add a time element, which is a regular HTML element, where the time or the date should be output. And also then below this div, another div where the address should be output. For this, we can use the address HTML element, which is also a regular element, where we will soon render the address. With that, we can move on to the other main div, which we added side by side to this first div. And here in this div, I in the end want to have a clickable link. So for this, we can use the link component, which we need to import. We import link from next link, as you learned, so that we can set up a link that takes us to another page. So here we'll then need to set up the URL, the path to which it should navigate. We'll do this later. And then as a text, it could say explore event. That's the general markup, the general HTML code which I want to use. Now, of course, it's lacking the concrete data though. So for this, we're getting props because that data should be passed in from outside. And I'll again use object destructuring to pull out that data from the props. And I do expect that we get a title, that we get an image, that we get the date and a location and an ID. Of course, we could also just expect one event prop and pull out the data from there, but I expect multiple props here. You can, of course, expect whichever props you want. So now we got that, and now here, for example, we can output the title constant here, which we get from props. Now for date and address, I don't just want to output the data like this. Instead, I want to transform it a little bit first. For example, I want to set up a human readable date. And for this, I'll create a new date object and pass date to it, because date, as we're getting it here, will have this format, which is kind of human readable, but not really pretty. But thankfully, that is a format which we can pass to the date constructor to turn it in a JavaScript date object. And on such a date object, we can then call toLocale datestring and then transform this into a human readable date string. The first argument here is the locale we want to use, and I will use enus. And the second argument then is an object where we configure how the different parts of the date should be output. For example, that a day should be output in numeric format, month should be output in a long form, and year should be output in numeric format as well. Now, if you want to learn more about this toLocale datestring method, you can of course search for MDN toLocale datestring and find the kind of official docs on that. And here you learn how that works and which other options you would have when it comes to configuring the output. The configuration I chose here should work really well though, and therefore now here instead of date, I'll output the human readable date like this. Now for the address, I also want to format this, and I'll create a formatted address where I use the location, so this location prop we're getting, this one, and then on that I call replace, and I replace comma white space with /n. Now all the locations have such a comma in there to separate the street from the postal code and city, and I'm simply replacing that with /n, which adds a line break. So that's what I'm doing here. And therefore now we can use this formatted address down there. Now we'll need to add some styling for this line break to have an effect, but we're going to do that later as well. Now we also have an image, of course, which we want to set up here. And the image is just a string in the dummy data, which is a path to an image which we added locally here. So we have that images/image name path in our public folder. That's why you should make sure that this image path and name matches your path you added your image in. But now that we do have this link here, we now can bind source to /+ image. Image is our prop here, and image will be a string like this, and I'm just adding a / at the beginning. And since all the content in the public folder will be served statically by Next.js, this request to /images/image name will succeed. We don't need to add public at the beginning here, so it's not /public/, but just /, because it's the content of the public folder which will be served statically. So public should be excluded because we don't need to dive into that folder first. It's the content of the folder which is being served by Next.js. So we can navigate as if we already were inside of that folder. Now for the alt text, I'll use my title again. With that, we're almost done, but we also want to wire up that link address, that link target here. And for this, I want to construct a link which takes this ID into account. I'll add a new constant here and name this explore link. Of course, this name is up to you. And here I'll use a template literal and start with /events/ and then inject something dynamic into this string. I'll inject the ID, the value which we get on the ID prop here. So that explore link is a string that includes that ID, and then it's this explore link which I bind here as a value to ref. And then with all that done, this component lacks styling, but is generally ready to go. So now in event list, we need to pass all that data, which is expected by event item. We need to pass those props into event item here now. So here I add the ID prop and pass in event.id. I add the title prop and pass in event.title. We add the location prop and pass in event location, and so on. Do the same for the date with event date, and the same for the image with event image. And then since we're mapping here, and since we're creating a list of items, we should also set the key prop, which is not expected by our component, but by React, whenever you output a list dynamically. And here we pass in event ID as well, since that will be a unique identifier per list item. And now with all of that, we can use this event list component in our starting page component, so in the home page component. For this, we import the event list component from going up one level, diving into components, events, event list. And then here, instead of this unordered list, we can simply output event list like that. And now, last but not least, we just need to make sure that we pass in items to event list. So here in the homepage component, we set the items prop and pass our featured events into event list. And if we now save all files and reload, I get an error, numeric is not defined, because an event item, that should also be a string wrapped by quotes. Now if I save this, now we have a large image here. And yeah, if we scroll, we see the data is there. But of course, it's lacking styling. And that's therefore what we're going to work on next.